Rotus is here now, and I would obviously definitely like to get your thoughts on this. Beyond the subsidy removal announcement by the president, he also talked about unified exchange rate. He talked about GDP to 6%. He talked about the creation of jobs, his commitment to 1 million jobs through the digital economy. So a number of key things he spoke about with regards to the economy. Two things a number of people were looking forward to hearing him immediately address at that speech, during that speech: the economy and security. He talked about security being a priority for his government. I'd like you to just share with us, your thoughts. I know you must have a lot of things to say about his initial speech.
Yeah, and it's rare that I'll disagree with you guys, but I actually thought it was a good speech. I thought it was, he made attempts to unify the nation. We've got some quotes. First of all, there was a part of the speech where he mentioned the different areas of the country. He says from the, savannah in the north to the boardrooms of Lagos to the markets in Onitsha, you are all Nigerians and you are my people. Yeah, I think this is the quote here, right? Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so it says, whether from the winding creeks of the Niger Delta, the vastness of the northern savannah, the boardrooms of Lagos, the bustling capital of Abuja, or the busy markets of Onitsha, you are all my people. And he also thanked those that voted for him. He thanked those that didn't vote for him. And he said he wants to extend an olive branch and we should move forward. He says, as your president, I shall serve with prejudice towards none, but compassion and amity towards all. So I thought he hit all the right notes. He also talked about the fact that his opponents have the right to go to court, and he, vociferously supports that right for them to challenge the election because that's their right. So, macro view, I actually liked the speech, and I thought that he really did hit all the necessary notes on the economy. Yeah. Now, with respect to the fuel subsidy, this is correct. It's you can't cost, and I think he did say there's no provision beyond. I think he was referring to the fact that the provision ends in June. So the 3.6 trillion that's been appropriated, there's nothing going forward. Well, I think technically what he meant was that there's
empirical factor. No,
true.
But empirical factor, there was budget provision, but it ended in June. It was half year.
Right, but we're fine. So if you want, if you want to split hairs, you can do that. But everybody knows that the Ministry of Finance repeatedly said last year that there is no provision for subsidy beyond June. So maybe, as far as what he meant, he said, in his speech, he said, look, this is what I hear, this is what I've read. There isn't enough money to put on this. And if you look at the quote there, he says there is not enough for this to go forward. Subsidies need to be removed. The sad thing is that he has been put in a hole by his predecessor who wasted 8 years and should have taken this off. And now there's no money left and it has to be removed. There was a lot in this speech. We can rifle. Go ahead. You go ahead.
I wanted to ask you a quick question. Please. And that was what came to my mind when I heard yet another president talk about the removal of subsidy. We've talked about the reasons why this hasn't been affected by previous governments who have announced that they would remove subsidy. Mm-hmm. To what extent should we hold this announcement true? Because he's not the first to say it.
Right.
And we've talked about, the Buhari administration, even through the signing of the PIA, it seemed like this was it. And they assured Nigerians that they were going to remove subsidy before the end of his tenure. Then towards the end of his tenure, he then, does
President Tinubu is backed into a corner. At this point, there is literally no money to continue this. He said during the campaign that he was going to take off subsidies. And this inaugural speech, before he spoke, I was saying privately to people that, listen, he needs to lay out his agenda because the entire world is watching this inauguration. Nigerians, people from other parts of the country, investors and everything. He needed to lay a marker down. There is no way that we have 31 days now until the subsidy provision, end of June. There's no way he backs down from this. His credibility will be destroyed. And you have to say, Tinubu speaks with an air of arrogance and an air of confidence, right? And he says it's gone. Subsidies, you can't go back from that.
Some would call it confidence and just being assured.
Assured, yeah. But so he speaks with a lot of confidence, and I think he can't go back on this. And he literally cannot because of the amount of funds that this is gulping, So he's got to move on. There were lots in there.
To the market now?
Well, so we saw there's a video I took where I was driving by the Palms where there was a line snaking around the mall. Yeah, there it is. So that was right after his speech. You're already seeing, stations holding fuel. Look, the market will respond, right? And yes, it's wrong. They shouldn't be doing that, but they're essentially trying to maximize their profits since the subsidy has essentially, according to the president, been removed. But you have to remember that we no longer have to have this expenditure on what cannot be afforded. And remember, only as far as who consumes majority of this fuel, it's the individuals with cars, large industrials, and so on and so forth. They are getting essentially a tax cut on this. So it's something that has to go. And look, he spoke, I have to say, I know I have been hard on him during the campaign and other things, but from a market perspective, he really hit the right notes. From the fuel subsidies to interest rates to monetary policy, exchange rates. I mean, every single thing he said, if you're a foreign investor, if you're a business owner, I mean, there'll be short-term pain if you want to move your exchange rates to a unified rate in terms of where the market, if you're talking about floating the naira now and the spikes and the volatility.
You remember the Bloomberg story?
Yeah.
Rotus.
Yeah.
And let me give you a feedback. You
Yeah.
remember the Bloomberg story that we took that projected that he was going to unify the exchange rates, that spiked, that the Bloomberg story said the rate was going to go over 500.
Yeah.
That story spiked the market. I got calls from a lot of currency dealers that story spiked the market. In fact, I had to go check back, and they said, you know what, did I write any story about Bloomberg saying the interest rate was going to be unified and spiked up?
Right.
So yeah. And that did spike the market. And my bone of contention has always been, yes, we will unify exchange rate, which is good.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. But how we do it, and the time at which we do it, at a time where we have some debt denominated in dollars, that it will make the cost of the debt increase.
Okay, that's correct.
That's the argument I put forward.
So the thing is again, like fuel subsidies, President Tinubu has been backed into a corner by former President Buhari. Former President Buhari should have removed fuel subsidies years ago. Former President Buhari had an economic team that included Bismarck Rewane, that included Doyin Salami, that included some of the smartest people in this country who all in one chorus and one voice said you need to unify exchange rates. And he did not do it. So now President Tinubu doesn't have a choice. He must move. And let me explain this thing about the rate spiking. If three of us are currency speculators and we believe that the exchange rate is going to move from 462 to 500, what do? We're going to hold on to dollars, demand for it, and that's going to push the rate up. It's like fuel. They think that fuel prices are now going to be deregulated. They hoard the fuel and the price goes up. You hoard dollars and the price goes up. So that's a normal market reaction. But again, he has been put in a hole by I really need to emphasize this for people. Look, and in one speech he says we're going to remove subsidy, we're going to move exchange rates, we're going to release interest rate. Something and this dragged on for 8 years. So 8 years.
Secondly,
what do you do?
Also, one of the reasons for the currency spike has always been the factors that even apart from the productive capacity of the economy, like number one, corruption. Number two, politicians, these same politicians. This rate of 760. Rotus, please remind me, what was the rate of the naira to the dollar before the party primaries?
Was it 550 or 5? It jumped, right?
550.
Yeah.
After the party primaries, because of these same politicians and speculators that mopped up, we got to this rate.
Right.
Those are the part of the legacy issues with our currency. You read a story recently about certain person and corruption shenanigan, and it was said that the person that was perpetrating that corruption told his commissioners to first go and convert 400 million or 400 million into USD.
Right.
So the demand for the dollar has increased because all of these corrupt parties all of a sudden see it as a quick currency to be able to transfer their corrupt loot. Those are the legacy issues. What are the plans to also clamp down on that? Yeah,
so you got to. So this is the thing. This is a supply issue, right? You don't have enough dollars in the system. So when politicians
you have so much demand.
You have so much demand. So that's now what is causing the price to spike. So what President Tinubu has to do now is to reduce that demand on FX. So now, if you are deregulating the downstream sector, you've got the Dangote refinery coming on stream. Yep. You no longer have to spend so much foreign exchange importing refined fuel into the country. So that's one part of it that addresses supply. Number two, when you unify the exchange rate and you have a single transparent exchange rate, foreign investors will now come into the country and say, okay, if I'm bringing my money into Nigeria, I know how much I am going to get. Single exchange rates, we know there's transparency, money comes in. So that also will augment the supply issues, because now everybody knows, okay, there's no 462 here, 750 here, for this, for that, one rate. So again, I really have to emphasize this. You campaign or whatever, inauguration speech in poetry, and you govern in prose, but he hit all the right.
And from the 12% economic growth to 6%, has reality setting on him now?
Okay, the 6% economic growth, he did not give a timeline on that.
No, but he said 12% during the campaign.
In the campaign?
Yeah.
Well, reality has set 6%. But if you listen to his speech, he said a minimum of 6%. So that means that he's giving himself some room to grow. You can't get 6% this year. You probably can't get 6% next year. Maybe we're looking at a 2025 or 2026. But he has given himself a target. And again, if you're a foreign investor and you're looking at Nigeria, he also talked about the power sector, electricity, and so on. You're like, okay, he's giving himself a target. 6% GDP growth, we're at 3.1 or barely 3 right now. So that is 300 basis points you're adding to growth. So that is, it was encouraging, you know, again.
Okay, so let me talk about, since you talk about foreign investment, for foreign investors, you talked about repatriation of funds, which is a big deal.
Huge.
When it comes to investor confidence, the ability to repatriate their funds as at the media here. What are the immediate things that we should begin to see in terms of that? Because the devil is in the details. It's not enough to come up with these promises. Of course, they're good, it can be inspiring, but what would be most inspiring would be to see how. You know, obviously, I didn't expect him to say all that yesterday. It was meant to be, I mean, the speech was long enough, but what are the immediate things? First of all, I'd like us to go back to the subsidy conversation.
Okay.
We've talked about the phasing out of subsidy. By the end of June, it has to be out. Already we're seeing the market effect, but what are some of the things that he needs to do to ensure that this finally happens and it's a successful removal and there's a minimal, I mean, we cannot take away the impact on the Nigerian people. There would be an impact. We would have to suffer for a little bit, but how can we cushion, or how can he cushion the effect of the impact? So that's when I would like you to speak to the repatriation of funds.
In fact, I think we have tweets from Sheun Onigwinde, who is the head of budgets, the think tank, right? So here's one. He says, always my position from 2011-2023. You can't remove subsidy without offering to reduce the waste in government. You can't be living large while the citizens bear the higher cost of living. You are the leader, you show example and earn trust. He then continued, and this is to answer your question. Subsidy removal must happen, but it requires tact. You have to figure out how to handle food inflation, provide alternative means of transport, and ramp up social investment under a well-structured social investment program. Anything else is a pathway to social disorder. He didn't in his speech illustrate exactly how the palliatives are going to work, right? So he didn't go into that. But the prior administration, they got this $800 million loan from the World Bank, and essentially he's talking about how that is going to, he has to now basically illustrate how that is going to work. So you've got to have a proper database where you know who are the people who are going to be most affected by this and how you're going to cushion them.
We have that database.
Well, we have the registry, right? And they've been giving that 5,000 naira per month to families. But the issue though is,
how is it verified?
How is it verified? You've got to have more. You've got to have more on that.
I think that money predominantly should have been used for social outcomes. So one other thing I gleaned from his speech yesterday was, this bill he wanted to talk about, this prosperity bill that he wanted to take to the House. For the youth and jobs.
Yeah.
I think monies like that is better used to improve outcomes and things like that, rather than flunking that money, 5K, to family members that, goodness me, we don't know about and we cannot empirically verify. And we don't have the cost-benefit ratio of the economy. Because you see, a lot of poor people, you give them 5,000 naira. It's just a meal for a couple of days. What's the knock-on effect of the economic impact? My argument has always been, Rotus, this is the way it's done in other parts of the world. Go to Brazil, study Bolsa Familia, all right, cash transfer scheme. There are targets tied to them. So if your family is on Bolsa Familia, they are giving you education outcomes that your child must go to school. Because they believe if your child goes to school, goes to the point of university, they'll be able to take you out of that poverty.
Yes.
And guess what, Rotus? About 10, 15 years ago, people on Bolsa Familia, that young generation that went to school, were the ones that came back to vote Lula in. And when you interview some of them, they said, see, my family was poor, but with Lula's Bolsa Familia, I could go to med school. I'm a medical doctor today. So that last election in Brazil was a payback for Lula. But for us, we just fritter cash away. We don't put outcomes with it.
So here's the thing, yeah, and there's something, we now go back to an issue of ideology here. President Tinubu back in 2014 wrote an article on how to solve the issue with falling oil prices. He's always believed ideologically that the APC are progressives while the PDP are conservatives, and he's somebody who is very much into spending, right? So to address that from a holistic view, as far as spending and GDP growth is concerned, if the economy grows, you alleviate poverty, and then maybe you don't have to spend so much on these programs. So, look, again, I thought he addressed this issue. Now, this is just talking. He's going to have to put this in place in actions going forward with his cabinet and so on.
Thank you very much, Rotus.
Right.
Obviously, we'll have more conversations around this in the next few days and months, and begin to see how the president will get the economy started.
All right, welcome back to the Morning Show right here on the Rise News channel. For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Great to have you, Michael.
Good morning, sir. Yeah, of course. Let's look at Asia-Pacific first of all, as we usually do. And they're sort of reacting to what appears to be positive noises coming from the United States about the debt ceiling discussion. I'll come on to more of that in just a moment. But it has to be said that the leader in all this is once again Japan stocks, which Wall Street apparently quite like. SoftBank down 4% after its 8% rise yesterday. But Japan stocks at a 3-decade high, so they're doing extremely well. China, some figures out of China, youth unemployment between the ages of 16 and 24 is up to 20.4%. One of the reasons for this is lots of people are going to university in China, but when they come out of university, they're either not getting a job or they're getting employment which is below their skill set. Now, some of us would say, well, welcome to real life, because it's often like that. But this is actually a real problem for China, and it's something which the authorities really want to get hold of. Staying with China, but moving to the United States in a sense, because never mind the sort of backlash that has been against TikTok and so on, some other apps, including Lemon8, that one there, and also CapCut, are doing relatively well in the United States. But the reason that they're doing well is they haven't really attracted anybody's attention yet, because they don't happen to have that 150 million subscriber base that TikTok has in the United States. But it's interesting. We'll maybe see how this develops, given that they are both owned by ByteDance, which also owns TikTok as well. Let's turn our attention to Turkey. Erdogan now confirmed as president. This is his third term, and a huge achievement for him. President Putin from Russia has called him a dear friend. And Turkey has a very odd sort of relationship. I mean, it's home to the second largest military force in NATO. But much to the chagrin of the EU, which it was trying to join a few years ago, not quite sure where that progress is going to be. A lot of people in Europe have been saying, well, we're not quite sure which side Turkey is on at the moment, but it's being seen because it's 50 million. No, it's not. It's 85 million people, and it's being bolstered by Russian tourists who are avoiding EU sanctions and going to the very nice coasts of Turkey for their summer holidays. Let us go then to the United States, and yes, there is some positive feedback coming out of the talks between the Republicans and the Democrats and Biden and Kevin McCarthy and all the rest of it. The the cutoff date is still June the 5th. But it has to be said, there is this very small, and I use that very, very advisedly, a small matter of getting this past the US Congress, which is going to be we could be looking at that as early as tomorrow. And Elon Musk is heading out to China, apparently. Whom he's going to see, we don't know. What he's going to talk about? We don't know. Would he be going to the Tesla factory in Shanghai? Very probably. The EU, now we're going to talk about Europe and the particularly possible banking mergers. We've seen UBS and Credit Suisse rescue and so on. The fact of the matter is that high interest rates will cause a lot of the assets that these banks are sitting on to be marked to market. In other words, they'll be worth less. And this is halting further joining between banks. They'd felt that the UBS Credit Suisse join-up was something that might prompt a bit of merger and acquisition as far as financial services sector is concerned, but it hasn't happened yet. In the UK, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, are meeting food bosses to talk about food prices. Now, there had been a lot of rumours yesterday that they were going to propose a price cap on prices. That is since been denied by Downing Street, and quite honestly, I think a lot of people are thinking that's no bad idea that it's been denied, because price caps tend not to work and tend to distort markets. Food inflation, which I was talking about last week, 19%, has come down very, very slightly, down to 15%, but it's still very high, and it's still taking a chunk out of household wallets. As far as the United Kingdom is concerned, the Labour Party, headed by Sir Keir Starmer, is planning to tackle the housing shortage by what may be compulsory purchase of land, and that'll be quite an interesting one to see how that actually gets through or not. But that's how they feel as though they're going to cope with the housing shortage. In other words, land which is owned by landowners will be sold cheaply at a price which will be set by the local authority. And as far as oil is concerned, finally, OPEC Plus meeting, that's scheduled for June the 4th. They're trying to read the runes as to what might come out of that. It's very, very difficult to say. There'll be a lot of mixed messages because it's such a varied collection of oil producers. That's the global view.
I mean, Michael, isn't it shocking how the prospect of the British economy has dwindled so much? When you talked about that rumor as regards price caps on food, pretty much reminds me of some time back in Nigeria in the 80s where we had something called essential commodities. What is really wrong with the Conservative Party? There's a story about eggs, that the UK now has to import a lot of eggs because local producers, they are not getting enough, for what they're churning out there. And there's the egg debacle as we speak. I mean, what's the price of egg in your area now in the UK? So what is going wrong as regards food inflation? Is this the best thinking possible that Rishi Sunak can bring to the table?
Well, what we're actually seeing is that, I have to say, when I heard that there was a thought that the government might ask the supermarkets to cap prices, I mean, that's something. The end result of that is empty shelves. I mean, that's what happened in the past. I don't know what your experience with it is, but as far as the UK is concerned, price caps like that do not work. It looks as though, again, with the British Retail Consortium saying this morning, as I was saying to you, that it looks as though food inflation is in fact falling, given that energy costs are down and so on, and wheat and feed and wheat are flowing back into the system. So it seems, and it looks like food inflation is down, I say down slightly, at 15%, still very, very high indeed, but it's not the 19% that it was. So I think gradually what's happening is the market is being allowed to drive prices at the moment. And I do feel that's the way to go forward. People will not continue to pay more to buy less, and that supermarkets will have to come to terms with that in whatever ways they can. That's what retail is all about.
All right, let me go to China, Michael. And just looking at the youth unemployment statistics, put it at roughly 1 in 5 young people unemployed in China. Now, about a month ago, the Chinese government had perhaps said the reason is because the young people are focusing too much on white-collar jobs, and they should go to the rural areas and try to look for jobs or pursue blue-collar jobs. Of course, there's a disconnect there because the young people also have said that's the reason they got an education, to avoid taking on blue-collar jobs. Do you think this proposition will work, that as opposed to having going for white-collar jobs, to move to the rural areas and seek for rural jobs?
I don't know works or not. I think it's a very good idea. I think far too many people go to further education when they could be doing vocational jobs, they could be doing apprenticeships, they could be doing blue-collar jobs as well, and getting a huge experience of the world of work, which comes probably as quite a shock to many graduates. I think what these statistics that I mentioned this morning point towards is that too many people in China have been going to university. They're coming out and finding that simply the jobs aren't there. I'm not sure this is necessarily about low unemployment amongst people who are not educated in inverted commas. I think that what these statistics are pointing to is exactly what you're saying, which is that too many people are going to university and therefore expecting big jobs afterwards. And the world, unfortunately, is not like that. And a lot of them are having to go to jobs which don't have the skill sets that they assume that they have after university. I would suggest that the university and further education gives you, unless you are tightly controlled in what you're studying, gives you very few skill sets to cope with the real world. And I think that apprenticeships and vocational training are very valuable indeed. I don't know what success China will have in pushing people out of the urban centres into the countryside, but generally speaking, I feel as though that's certainly the way forward with employment.
Well, thank you very much for your time this morning, Michael Wilson.